What's up, guys? Welcome back to Total Marriage, where we talk about the total relationship experience. Excuse me. I know it's the middle of the week, 7:30. I know that's late for some of you guys, so I'm not going to keep you long. What are we talking about today? Sex is the topic, and sex is one of those main pillars in relationships that usually causes a point of frustration for a lot of people. And I don't know what it is that you guys have with going to therapy as far as getting help. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem, but it's just really one of those things that you can touch bases with to kind of make sure that you guys are on the right track and everything is running smoothly. So, for the people that might be listening and have an issue with the idea of going to therapy, what I've been trying to do is I would find therapists that are willing to come up, talk with you guys about some of your issues, ask questions. They're doing it for free. So now would be the time for you guys to come up, ask whatever questions you might have, and we'll just go from there. So today, the therapist that I have, she is based out of Texas. Her name is Lindsay Murray, and she was gracious enough to come up here and talk with us today. So if you guys get your pen and paper ready, get your questions ready to ask her whatever questions you guys may have, I will go ahead and bring her up. Hey, Lindsay, how's it going?
It's going good. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate
Oh,
it.
no problem at all. I appreciate your time. And like I said, I know it's late, so I would not keep you long at all. Um, if you could do me a favor, actually, before we do that, I see that there's a few people watching right now. Could y'all give Lindsay a shout out? Just type Lindsay in the chat. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we can go ahead and get started, and as people roll in, I'm sure more questions will pop up. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you chose this line of therapy?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, my name's Lindsay Murray, and I do have a private practice in Dallas, Texas called Relationship Matters Therapy. And I've been in private practice for about 3 years. And I'm a licensed professional counselor and a certified sex therapist. And so I mean, essentially what that means is that's what my education is in, that's what my experience is in. And I would say in my private practice, I primarily see couples. I do see individual clients as well, but my
Mhm.
expertise is really in couples and with relationships. And the reason I went into sex therapy specifically, and what I'm about to share, it is personal, but I am open to sharing this. But I personally have am a survivor of sexual assault and rape, and
Mhm.
went through my own therapy journey, like healing that trauma. And through that journey, it kind of inspired me to get into something in that field to give back to others. And initially, I was thinking maybe I would specialize in trauma, and I do have a trauma background. I do have clients that I help with their trauma, but it ended up kind of morphing into more so with the aspect of couples and relationships. And so that's where I am today.
Well, I really do appreciate you for sharing that. And it sounds like you're pretty open and transparent. Um, Before we even, I guess, jump into the content, how did what you went through, and again, you don't have to be
Sure.
share whatever you're comfortable with sharing, but how did what you went through affect you enough for you to come into this line of work?
Absolutely. I think my journey is, it may sound weird, but it's actually pretty common. I think after going through what I've experienced, I think it was honestly hard for me to commit to a relationship. Like I was very
Mhm.
mistrusting of people. It was easy for me to maybe have casual sex and have multiple partners, but to actually commit in a relationship really freaked me out after what I had gone through. And I'm married now, but even back when I met my husband, as great as he is, a month into it, I could just feel that bubble coming up of feeling trapped or feeling like, what if I do trust this person and they really screw me over? And so the therapy I went through was trauma, but it was also my own attachment in relationships, and how can I
Mm.
change that? How can I really get what I want through the process of healing? And maybe that was part of why I work with couples now, is because I think the relationships we have, whether they're romantic, sexual, family, friends, whatever, I just think those relationships are what shape our life. You
Hmm.
know, we don't go through this life alone. And so if people are not happy in their relationships, I love helping them work through that.
Okay, well, I really, really do appreciate you for sharing that. So, you are not just a person that went to school and you got the information you needed to teach other people and to educate them. You actually had to learn this essentially in a hard way.
Mhm.
So, I definitely can respect that. Um, on a day to day basis, what type of client are you getting? As
So
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
oh, yeah, sorry, did you have more to your
Oh,
question? I
no,
didn't.
no, 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 that was it. I was gonna elaborate, but if that makes sense enough, then go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
Mhm,
I would say a lot of my couples, it's a mix between desire discrepancy or mismatched libidos. I see that a lot in couples. Or I see couples that are navigating different types of relationships. Maybe they've always been monogamous, but now they want to be non monogamous and they want to open up. They want to have sex with others. They want to have additional partners. And so I'll get a lot of clients that either want to do that but don't know how, or they tried to. And am I allowed to curse on here? On Okay. Because what I was going to say is it'll either be couples that have never done it, but they want to start, step one like the right way, or it'll be couples who maybe rush through that and then it ends up being like a big clusterfuck. And then they come in and they're in this crisis mode of, oh no, what have we done? And we don't know what to do now. So I can kind of help them through that crisis and then get them back on track, like whatever that means for them. Oh, I can't hear you anymore. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, when you say starting it out the right way, what do you mean by that?
When I say starting out the right way, I really mean communicating a lot,
Mhm,
being vulnerable, coming up with really solid agreements, because to open up a relationship, that can look 100 different ways. And
mhm,
so what are we agreeing to? What's okay? What's not okay? What's non-negotiable? What could change? Who do we want to tell? There's so many in-depth conversations that unfortunately a lot of people don't have, and then feelings get hurt because you don't know what you're not gonna like until it happens, but then when it happens,
mhm.
it's too late, right? And so when I say it the
Right.
right way, that doesn't even necessarily mean someone has to come to therapy, but you really gotta have those skills to figure out, "Hey, what are we actually doing here before we take any steps?"
Mhm. Yeah, I've seen that before where, and I know this isn't the norm, but people will get into relationships and later on down the line, they're wanting to do something to spice the relationship up. And they just kind of go head first into some something taboo. And then
Mhm.
later on down the line, they realize that I didn't like that. And now they're trying to backtrack, and that just creates a whole nother beast within the relationship. So I can definitely see that. I know you mentioned earlier that you said that you worked with a lot of people who don't necessarily have sh- um, a normal structured relationship.
Mhm.
So those people who are swingers, poly, people in couple relationships, or like all of these other different types of things. Can you share what your experience is with working with those? Like, is it usually on the better side, like there's a good outcome, or is it a bad outcome, or what does that look like?
I think if the couple is willing to do the work, and what I mean by doing the work is I just mean that if things are not going okay, there needs to be adjustments, right? And
Mhm,
it's on both partners. I look at the dynamic. And so it's like, where are things not going well? Where do we need to make adjustments? If both people are willing to make those adjustments and they say, hey,
mhm,
I want this to go well, I want to make positive change. If they're willing to do that kind of work and they allow me to help them, the outcomes are actually really good. And so
mm,
I'm definitely not, for anyone listening, if you're monogamous and you want to stay monogamous, like for sure do that, right? Nothing wrong with that. Just like there's nothing wrong if you want to open up, because that people do end up wanting to do that. I think why it ends up being really great is because if you think you have to communicate a lot in a marriage, you have to communicate tenfold if you have an open marriage, because you
right.
have other people involved and you have to be really vulnerable and you have to be really honest. Something I see that happens quite a bit is opening up is really fun. new relationship energy is really fun. You meet new people, you have an exciting new partner, whatever. It's really fun. People don't want to like kill the vibe. So
Mhm.
they'll try to act like, hey, like you do whatever, but they're not really being honest. You know, if someone's honest from step one to say, ooh, actually, I don't know if I'm okay with that. We're gonna need to talk about that. That might be too
Mhm.
much for me. That might be too far for me. People are afraid to say that because they're afraid it's going to cause an argument or something. And then what happens is the thing happens. They never spoke up about it. Now there's resentment. Now there's arguing. And so, like, that lack of honesty in the beginning is troublesome, right? It's a slippery
Mhm.
slope. And so, anyways, and I know this is maybe a long winded answer, but
Oh, no, 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 go for it.
can end up being really great because there's a certain level of vulnerability and openness it takes to
Mhm.
create the structure that you want.
Hmm. Is there anything that you typically tend to stray away from, or you've noticed that there isn't a high success rate with a certain approach?
Yes, the number one thing I would say, the number one agreement I see that never goes well is if, let's say, because there's different structures. There could be swingers, we're just having sex with other couples. It could be
Mhm.
open, we have other sexual partners. And then there's also polyamory, which is more like relationships with other people. Sex
Mhm.
can be involved, it's emotional. The biggest agreement I see that never works is if a couple agrees to open up, they have sexual partners, but we don't want to be poly. So the agreement is we're not going to have feelings for anyone else.
So
That one can come back to bite you
mhm.
because you can't control your feelings, right?
Right.
If you're sleeping with someone, you might develop feelings, but if that's not allowed, what happens is, well, it's not allowed, so I'm not going to tell my partner about it, but I'm going to keep seeing this person and my feelings are going to continue to grow. And now we've got an issue where the other partner feels betrayed. And so I always will
Mhm.
tell couples I work with, we really can't legislate feelings. The agreement really needs to be more like, if feelings were to happen, here's what we want to do about it.
Mhm. Having a
Right.
plan.
Hmm.
So in marriage, there are people who have this idea in their head that they have a duty to have sex with their partner, whether they feel like it or not, because they're married, they can have sex with anyone else, whatever the case may be. What experience do you have with people who come into your office with that mindset that they're having sex out of duty, not because, not necessarily all the time, but they're having sex out of duty, not necessarily desire or it being intimate, but I have a job to do.
Hmm. I see that a lot, unfortunately,
Hmm.
because if it's obligatory, there really is no space to desire it. It's
Hmm.
kind of like, I have to take the trash out every Tuesday and Friday and I have to do it. I don't really desire doing that thing, but I don't have a choice. I'm going to do it.
Right.
Anytime it feels that way, I'll always ask, is that an internal pressure? And sometimes it is. Sometimes it's the person saying, my partner's never asked me to do that. They've never made me do that. I just feel like I have to.
Hmm.
But it could also be sexual coercion from their partner, where if they do say no, they get the guilt trip, they get the cold shoulder, they get the punishment,
Hmm.
saying no. And then it feels like to make them happy, I'll just do it. So, yeah, I do see that quite a bit, and I just kinda have to tease out, "Hey, why is that happening?"
Hmm.
And how is that negatively affecting your sex life? Because it is negatively affecting it.
Right.
Mhm.
So when you say it's negatively affecting it, what have you seen that evolve into?
I honestly it really does evolve into a huge gap as far as levels of desire go. Because the
Hmm.
partner who's doing it out of obligation, what they tend to report to me is like, "I never desire sex. It's never on my mind. I don't wanna do it. It's just not something it's not something that's important to me."
Hmm.
And then their partner can take that as like, "You don't wanna have sex with me." So it feels like a rejection, right? So then now we have this disconnect. If you get out of that obligation mindset and you just let it be okay, if you don't want to have sex, don't do it.
Mhm.
You then have more space to figure out, well, what is my own sexuality? When might my libido, when could it be there? What turns me on? What gets me going, right? Without
Mhm.
that space, the couples are kind of stuck in this big difference, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
It does. Have you noticed any differences or any not necessarily differences? Have you noticed any trends between men and women as far as what's common that men do well or struggle with, or what women do well and what women tend to struggle with?
I do. Yeah, I do notice some trends. And I know this is very, like, I'm stereotyping here, and this, I'm not saying this
Mhm.
is true for everyone, but a lot of men will pout when the answer is no to sex, and
Mhm.
it's very unattractive when your partner does that. Like, hey, I don't want to have sex right now, and they're kind of pouting and moping around. It doesn't get them any closer to their partner being interested.
Mhm.
Um, and where I would say women really struggle is women tend to not speak up about their sexuality. Like, they tend to, I think, kind of the myth is like,
Focus on
you
pleasing.
focus on pleasing the
Mhm.
man, focus on pleasing my husband, and that's all they focus on. And they never really take that time to stand up and go, well, wait a second. I actually like some other things that,
Mhm.
I want to try something else. They'll just kind of go along. And when that's the dynamic for long enough, sex doesn't seem very fun.
Mhm.
I have couples who are really struggling in sex. It's stressful, it's not fun, and therefore they don't really want to do it.
Right. So with that, I guess a good follow-up question would be, so in the beginning of a lot of relationships, not all, there is a lot of pleasing being done. I want to put my best foot forward for this person on both sides.
Mhm.
And a lot of that, from my experience, what I've noticed anyway, not like me personally, but what I've noticed is a lot of that revolves around the um, chivalrous, like come and pick you up, take you on a date, buying you flowers, like having sex whenever, however, and all of these other different things. As things progress into a relationship, you were talking about libidos earlier.
Mhm.
Libido is changing. And one person, whether it's the male or the female, whose sex drive is up and the other person's is down, which is different from how they started. How do you navigate that whenever someone, because I'm sure you get that all the time.
All the time. That's
Mhm.
probably the most common story is
Mhm.
things were hot and heavy in the beginning, they aren't now. And it's really complicated. These are honestly the hardest cases I have with couples because it's so multifaceted, right? It's like I'm
Mhm.
always looking for, um I initially will inquire about, like, physical health, right? If there's a
Mhm.
physical reason that's impacting libido, I'm always curious about that, or will recommend they go see a doctor or specialist or whoever. Most of the time, that's not really the issue.
Mhm.
It's their relationship stress, life stress, or something. It's mental, right? It could be your mental perspective and your thought process. So I'm also looking at, how is their relationship going? Because sometimes if the relationship is really good in the beginning and now they're in a place where, let's say, the lower libido partner feels really unsupported by the other partner, that can impact. It's kind of honestly a question of, is it a low libido, or is it, I just don't want to have sex with my partner in this context? It
Mhm.
honestly is the truth.
The loss of interest.
Yeah, exactly. Loss of
Mhm.
interest given where we are right now. Um, and then I'm also looking at, is there any issue with sexual trauma, any issue with attachment? Because for a lot of people, sex without intimacy is easier. When you really build a life with someone,
Mhm.
it's the most intimate, it's the most shared. Sometimes that's the opposite of, like, erotic and sexy for someone, and so it's like the more comfortable you get with someone, the
Mhm.
more you pull away sexually. So then I'm helping them figure out, how do we change that context for you? How do we change that association for you?
You
Because
said the more comfortable you get with someone, they what? I'm sorry.
they'll like pull away sexually and they
Mm,
won't even notice that they're doing it, right? They're just like, I don't know why my libido's low. And if I go through their history, which I will, I'll go through their sexual history, their family history. If the time when they felt their libido was the highest was in very casual situations, it's always a clue in for me of like, huh, I wonder if commitment and life sharing and deep intimacy is like the opposite of eroticism for you. And for some people it is, right?
mm,
So there's all these things that go into figuring out what is the cause of it and
mhm.
how do the partners understand each other better to kind of meet in the middle. Because you really can't, I'll tell everyone, I can't ever guarantee that my help is going to make your libido go up. But what I can help you do is understand yourself better. And then hopefully your partner can understand you better and we can go from there.
So, any event that someone does have a low libido and you have gotten around to the point where you kind of pinpointed where the issue is, do you refer them out to someone else to get that help, or is a lot of that something that you can take care of?
That's something that I can take care of that I still help them with. So
Okay.
I'm kind of the assessment, but also hopefully solution oriented too,
Mhm.
at some point.
Okay. Do you ever take a religious approach to any of your sessions?
I do not, no. I'm not religious and I don't do any kind of faith-based counseling. I
Okay.
do have clients that are religious and they know that I'm not. I am very upfront about that.
Mhm.
But I've heard a lot of people, and again, I don't want to speak for everyone, but the clients who come to me who are religious, like they've gone to a counselor who might have a religious approach, but they don't specialize in sex therapy. So then it's kind of hard to find. It's kind of hard to find someone who does both, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense actually. Now that you put it that way,
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier also about intimacy.
Mhm.
What other forms of, because everyone doesn't work in a way where they're just ready to go all the time. Like
Mhm.
something turns them on, they're ready to go. Some people they actually need you to speak to them, spend time, like the love languages. I
Yeah.
need you to do something for me. What other forms of intimacy are there that people could practice?
Yeah. The first one is emotional intimacy.
Mhm,
Some people, when they really feel heard and they feel seen by their partner, and their
mhm,
partner goes out of the way to do something for them that they know they enjoy it and they don't say anything about it, they just do it.
mhm,
That can be a really big form of intimacy right there.
mhm,
And intimacy can also look like just support. And maybe some of that goes back to emotional intimacy, but supporting your partner even when they're at their lowest moments
mhm,
or even when they're upset with you, right? Like conflict resolution and conflict management is very
mhm.
and I will tell you, conflict avoidant people tend to have the hardest time with intimacy. They do.
Conflict avoidant people tend to have the hardest time with intimacy.
Mhm.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. So if someone is conflict avoidant as in, like I'll use my husband as an example. If he does something that really bothers me and I never say anything about it, like I don't want to, let's say I don't want to hurt his feelings. And like I'm mentioning that because conflict avoidant is not like ill intent, right? It could,
Mhm.
I just don't want to hurt his feelings.
Picking your battle type of situation.
Yeah, but
Mhm,
this same thing happens over and over. It really bothers me. It starts getting under my skin. I'm still not saying anything about it.
mhm,
It's building resentment. It's hard to be intimate with someone that you feel resentment towards. Right? Whereas if I just told him the thing in a loving way and said, "This is probably really hard to hear, but can we talk through this together?" At the end of that kind of that really tough conversation, that is like the ultimate intimacy because we
mm,
learned something new about each other. We reached a new point, we reached a new level, and it was a safe space for me to be honest. Whereas if I avoided it, partners can pull away and their partner will not know why.
mhm.
Right? So the intimacy is not really room for intimacy in the conflict avoidance.
So, having a good practice of conflict resolution where you can voice your issue, it gets addressed appropriately the way that you need it to, and then there's a resolution at the end of it, can be a form of intimacy.
Yeah,
Hmm,
absolutely.
interesting. Um, how have you seen what pornography does as it pertains to a person's sex drive? Or it
So I I might have a controversial take on this, and I recognize that. I'm just giving that first. Okay. Um, I don't have an issue with porn, and I don't think porn inherently has to be a problem, especially in a marriage. Now, again,
Mhm,
that's person specific. If I have someone who's like, I don't want it in my marriage, that's a value that they have, right?
mhm,
They can have that value. I personally don't see an issue with it. I think when it starts becoming a problem is if someone is using porn more than they want to be with their partner. And I've heard
mhm,
that before. My partner never wants to have sex with me. They won't even touch me. They don't want to be close to me at night, but they're watching porn every day. That
mhm,
I would say is a problem, right? Because now it's an issue in the relationship. I think what it can do, it can be isolating, I would say. And again, I don't have an issue with it, but if that's your only form of sexual pleasure, let's say,
mhm,
it can be very isolating. And it also can give, without proper education, it can give a really skewed view of what sex looks like. I mean, that's really unfortunate. Like a lot of people
mhm.
don't get any education, but what they see in porn, they think that's how it's going to look in real life. And it can be disappointing because that's not what it looks like in real life. So I guess in summary, if there's proper education, I think it can be okay. It's for erotic purposes. Like I get that.
Mhm.
But if it's disconnecting you from your partner and that's the expectation you have of sex, I would challenge that.
Yeah, and one of the like I haven't really done a whole lot of like research or looking into it, but one of the things that I always thought was like you said, it creates this false reality of what that area looks like, and it can cause you to not only just expect it, but it can also cause you to become insecure because you're not like those things. So
Yeah.
when you can't perform that way, but in your mind, that's your expectation of what you should be doing or you should have, or, whatever the case may be, you would tend to draw back from
Yeah.
your partner, or it'll make you feel as though you're missing out because your partner can't perform the way that any of these people who are on whatever they're on and doing, just it creates a false sense of reality.
Yeah.
So, what way have you seen that it actually helps?
I've seen it help. Well, I guess in a couple ways. Some people might watch porn together, and that can be really fun and exciting
Mhm,
and kind of a, and again, when I say it's for erotic purposes, like if it turns you on and then you get to go and have fun with your partner, I mean,
mhm,
that's super helpful, right? And so I'm
mhm,
always like a fan of that. A way it can help too, though, is, and this goes back to those couples who have different levels of libido. And if one partner has a really hard time taking no as an answer, like they get really
mhm.
desperate or they feel like, uh, we're never having sex, we're not having sex enough. Porn can be helpful because if you don't have access to your partner, you can't have sex with yourself. And I'm really big on that because I'll hear people say, well, sex is a need of mine. I'm like, phrasing it that way, when you're saying like sex with my partner is a need of mine, kind of puts pressure on your partner to always be available for you. And that's just not reality, right? Like they're not
Mhm.
always going to be ready for you. If you really are in the mood and your partner doesn't want to, you can go take care of yourself. And if porn helps you take care of yourself, like by all means, go for it. So that's
You
another
know
way that I
I'm
find it
sorry.
helpful.
I'm sorry.
No, that's all I was saying. I was just saying that's another way I find it to be helpful.
And have you seen any issues that come from that? Because again, this is just my limited thinking. I'm not seeing patients every day. I'm not in your space. So do you think that if every time someone gets told no, they just have to go find a way to get it? like if they're going in that direction? Do you
Mhm.
see that being a potential issue where they, as far as like self control and everything else like that? Or
If it well, that's a really good question. If it was
Mhm,
an issue of self-control, like, let's say it escalated and they started, like, having sex with other people or they
mhm,
took it beyond porn. I don't think porn is really the issue. I think the impulse control is the issue, and so
mhm,
then with that person, I am looking at why might the impulse control be an issue for you? Like, what's
mhm,
difficult about not being able to have sex with your partner, but doing something that is still in the confines of your marriage? If it's difficult to not go and break the agreements and the vows that you have with your partner, why might that be? So
mhm,
it's interesting. It's like it's hard to explain because surface level, it does seem like sex and porn is the issue. In my experience, it's the person's there's something else within that person that they're struggling with
mhm.
that I have to help them kind of figure out in my experience.
I got you.
Yeah.
So let's separate the okay, let me make sure I don't get canceled by saying this way. I'm going to say this to you because I think you understand what I'm getting at, but I'm not saying this to offend anybody. But let's separate men and women.
Mhm.
Whatever the connection is, or however that may look, just for the sake of this conversation, men and women.
Sure.
What have you noticed that causes a negative effect when it comes to sex for men and women separately? Like lifestyle change, lifestyles, medications, attitudes, or like you talked about before, certain types of trauma might offend, might bother people a certain type of way. Upbringing, like what have you seen that affects them separately?
I would say, I think everything I answered could go either way, but I'll give you kind of
Hmm.
my maybe split view, right? Like if we're
Hmm.
talking in maybe bigger picture here, I think a lot of men really struggle with self-esteem, but don't really want to admit that. A lot of men get a lot of validation from sex, which is totally fine, by the way. I've
Hmm.
got no issue with that, right? Like I think if it's a way for you to feel validated, wanted, desired, like of course you do when someone wants you in that way. I see a lot of men rely heavily on that as like their only source of validation and attention and being wanted. And so then when their partner doesn't want to, it really can send them in a spiral. I mean, they really feel like my life is crumbling. That might sound extreme, but that's what I hear. Right.
Hmm.
So then it's that conversation of, why is their self esteem so low? And what's interesting is a lot of men won't even realize it until I maybe point it out to them or even suggest it. And with women, I would say, uh, like a big stressor. And I might be getting off the question here, so we're going back
Oh, no,
in.
no, no, go for it.
Yeah, but women, I would say, life stress and anxiety really gets to them much more
Mhm,
than I see it with men. Like work stress, taking care of children, taking care of the household, overall not having any energy tends to
mhm.
affect them the most. That's when their libido can really tank. I would say, especially after having children. I think a lot of women share that common experience of, hey, I had a child 6 months ago, a year ago, and my libido's never been the same because there's so many hormonal changes happening to them that it's difficult, right? Sex is
Mhm.
different for them now.
So, what would you tell someone, and I know all of this is a case by case situation, but and they can also go both ways, but what would you tell someone in that situation where they did have kids and the libido went down and a lot of it may be revolving around this is my world now, this is where all my attention need to be, and stress either external or internal, whether you created yourself. What would you tell someone who might unintentionally be adding stress onto their plate with those things you just named?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I really try to navigate with them. How do you make time for yourself? And is it important to make time for yourself? And is your sexual relationship a part of that? Because when I think about a really good sexual relationship, it's pleasurable, it's fun, we both had a good time, we both feel better afterwards. Sometimes I have to remind them, hey, you still deserve those things in your life, even though you've got a child, even though you're tired, even though you've got work. where are you carving in time for yourself? And usually they're not. Like,
Mhm,
not even just for sex, but it's like hobbies and an hour to go to lunch by yourself. Like, even those little things, can feel like there's no opportunity, but maybe there is. And so then
mhm,
you're just talking about how are we making time for that and how do we imagine that would feel even in the context of your sexual relationship?
hmm. Have you noticed any, so someone's life before being in a relationship, promiscu
Mhm.
promiscuous people,
Mhm.
if someone is promiscuous, how have you seen that affect their relationship? So if it's a male or female, whatever gender, who had a very active sex life before and they're coming into a relationship, do you see any like detachment or difficulty committing or wanting to that that hunger being too strong for a relationship?
Um, I don't really see that so much.
Mhm,
I do think, I mean, one, it could be just fine, right? Like, I've definitely seen plenty of people who are promiscuous and had no issue committing, and if not, there's been no infidelity, nothing like that. And so they've been fine. I think what I normally see, I guess maybe it is a struggle to commit, but it's not necessarily I don't, or I'm struggling to commit because I want to keep having sex with others.
mhm,
Usually, what I see is kind of flipped. It's like I've had a lot of casual sex because committing to someone really freaks me out, you
mhm,
know? And so, like, if they get a chance to commit, sex usually isn't the number one thing on their mind. It's more so like that feeling of being trapped, that feeling of commitment is terrifying,
mhm.
and then kind of working with them there.
I got you.
Mhm.
I don't know if you thought about this or not, but what is, and obviously I understand HIPAA and everything else, but without like giving up any names or anything, what is the craziest case you've seen walk through your doors? Craziest, most interesting that you've seen?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that is a really good question. I'm trying to think. I mean, the craziest, I guess I shouldn't say I don't know where this falls on the scale, right? Of like
Hmm.
interesting. But like extremely disappointing, I guess I would say. It's happened to me a couple times where like I might be working with a couple and infidelity has happened and
Hmm.
we're working through that repair of repairing the relationship, and they might be in therapy for 6 months, a year, quite a while, and then it comes out that the affair never ended, and so when that comes out,
Hmm.
it's another bomb being dropped on the relationship,
Hmm.
so I don't know, crazy, maybe not so much, but difficult, I would say,
I
is when
got you.
something like that happens, yeah.
So nothing completely out of the norm, like a crazy relationship structure, and because I've heard some, I'm not sure. You watch a lot of YouTube.
Yeah.
Have you heard of this podcast called Soft White Underbelly?
I've heard of it, but I don't know if I've ever listened to it.
Let me tell you something. If you ever want to figure out how crazy the world is, they have similar, like we're talking about right now, just a lot of different relationship structures and everything else like that. But I've seen some on there where I'm just like, "Ah, this doesn't even make sense to me." And I hear a lot of crazy stuff like the structure just doesn't make sense to me whatsoever, but it worked for them.
What was one that you heard that was like you're like, "Whoa."
One was this, I don't remember what their title was, but it was uh I'll just say it. It was a cuckold couple, and the woman never allowed the man to have sex with her.
Mhm.
She always made him watch or record it, and she was like, "I would have sex with this many people throughout the week," and he would just watch it, and the interviewer would look at the guy, I'm like, "Are you okay with that?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, man, people look at sex just crazy and blah, blah." I'm like, "Okay, so what do you do when all of this is going on?" "I'll either sit in there, I'll join in, I'll just listen to what she tells me to, so you do whatever she wants you to do?" You're like, "Yeah, I mean, the world is hers. You know, I get to buy my motorcycles, and she doesn't. I can buy my motorcycles and my guns, and she doesn't complain about this, that, and the third. And I mean, people look at sex just whatever type of way, but she was in a position where she was like lording over him,
Yeah.
and they looked as happy could get. They were like they just picked random people up off the street. She would go back, do whatever she did with them, and he would just watch and record or join in if she told him to. And just I'm like mind blown.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
I've I have worked with not that exact situation, but kind
Hmm.
of the it can seem like a power imbalance, but
Hmm.
when everyone involved is consenting, people can actually be really happy with that. I guess I have worked with so many unique dynamics that it's hard for me to. I feel like not at this point, nothing. I almost like nothing phases me like anymore.
Hmm.
You know, like I'll hear an interesting dynamic, and um, it's only a problem when it's a problem, you know.
Right.
And if
Hmm.
they're like I said, they look happy as ever. For me, like I know for me personally, I would not want to be in a relationship like that. Like I would me as Lindsay would look like, how does that work? I don't understand.
Right.
But hey, if that's for them, then hey, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. It is very interesting. And there's a lot of other cases on there like that where. Oh, excuse me. There's a lot of other cases on there like that where he goes and looks at like the dark sides of the world and shines light on things that a lot of people. So goes to people with addiction issues. He goes talks to like military veterans and pimps and prostitutes and people who are, he interviews a lot of different people, but their background is very, very dark in
Mm,
most of those cases. And there's a lot of them on. You should definitely check it out. Soft White Underbelly. But
okay.
so we've been on for about 40 minutes. I don't know if any of you guys have any questions, but if you do, drop them in the chat because we are getting ready to wrap up. My second to last question is why do you think people actually this could be both. Why do you think people struggle with coming into your office?
I think they struggle because they feel very exposed. Like, even though you might know this is a private space, I'm bound to confidentiality, having to say the hard things out loud to someone else, to yourself, or
Mhm.
to your partner sitting there is really fucking hard, you
Mhm.
know? And I think people know, I mean, if you find a really good therapist, they are going to challenge you, not like off the bat, right? Like in the beginning, I want to get to know you. I want to go slow because I know this is like a big step. But there's going to come a point where I do challenge you and your partner or whatever. And I just think a lot of people have a really hard time with that. You know, it's like, even though I know this could help, I'm
Mhm.
going to have to be so extremely honest about things that I might not be ready for.
Mhm.
That's hard.
And that sounds like a issue that you would need to dig a little bit deeper into because the communication isn't there.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the biggest things in relationships is if you can tell the person that you're with your purest truth and
Mhm.
they can receive that and operate with that instead of feeling attacked, as long as it's communicated appropriately.
Yeah.
If you can communicate that to them and they take it, they operate with it the way that they need to and give it back to you, I don't necessarily see how any relationship can't work.
Right. Yeah,
'Cause
I agree totally.
that in conjunction with effort. So I think that what you just said is very true. A lot of people, it hurts to hear that you're not perfect. There's some area in this relationship that you're not perfect in and it needs work. Not that you're a bad person, but you just need work. So I don't necessarily know if this would be like an encouraging thing, but what would you say to the people that might be listening now or sometime later on down the line? What would you say to them who are aware that they have an issue and that they need some form of help? What would you say to them for them to at least seek help, whether it's with you or with someone else?
Yeah. I would say first, it's great that you're that self-aware. I mean, that level like, even being aware of what you need to work on is a
Mhm.
huge skill in of itself, and not everyone has that. So there's already, like, some hope there. And the next thing I would say is that coming to therapy, it is really hard. It's really scary. Just say that. I mean, literally, whether
Mhm.
it's your therapist, your partner, when you're feeling stuck, you're feeling scared, you're afraid to be judged, you worry about whatever, you're feeling shame. Sometimes just saying that is all you really need to do to start the change.
Mhm.
Right? You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to know how to communicate perfectly because just like you said a minute ago, you're not perfect, but no one is. And even the therapist helping you has got their own shit that they have to work on too.
Mhm.
So you're not going to be met with judgment. It's just another person to person guiding you.
Right. It's
Yeah.
really just someone looking in the mirror and seeing the blemishes. It's like, keep the lights off. Don't show it to me. I don't want to hear about it.
Mhm.
Out of sight, out of mind, as long as it's not being brought up. Because I've heard people also in relationships where they may have a partner who will bite the bullet or not mention or say anything, but at the same time, they know that that thing that isn't being said is an issue. So they're waiting for that thing to be said, knowing that it isn't going to be, as an
Yeah.
excuse to not change, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Well, it does make sense. And I
Okay.
see it, and I see it in my practice too. I see
Mhm.
it like I do always encourage people to be honest, but we can read between the lines a little bit, right? You
Mhm.
can tell when your partner's really upset. And if it's something that keeps happening, right? It's like, I notice when I do this thing, they give me this look like they want to murder me.
Mhm.
But they're not saying it, they just give me the look. But I'm just gonna let them keep doing it because they're not really
Then
saying
that's
yeah, and
exactly.
it's like, but you can read between the lines, something
Mhm.
isn't right. You also need to take that step to go, I obviously can tell you're not okay. So, what's going on? I mean, what is
Right.
bothering you or bring attention to it. But again, really hard to do because it's easier not to do it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, Lindsay, I know I did asked a lot of questions. Is there anything before we go that you feel as though is necessary to mention, to discuss, talk about to either side of the coin or to the couple themselves that I didn't ask?
No, you asked a lot of really good questions. I would just say anyone wanting to come to couples therapy, find a couples therapist that you really like, that clicks with
Hmm.
you, that their approach tends to work with you. My approach is very I'm focused on each individual and what their role is and the dynamic. I never want any one person to feel like it's all their fault. So I'm always looking at what is the dynamic, what's the cycle you're getting stuck in, and what do you each need to do about it. And for a lot of people that works, and some people may want a different approach. Just ask your therapist those questions, right, to make sure that they're
Hmm.
the right person. And the last thing I will say, I'm doing kind of like a self promotion here,
Go
but
for it.
I do have my own podcast that is about sex. It's about all things sex, and it's called Sex Positivity Unfiltered. And I co-host it with a good friend of mine. Her name's Denise Stratton. But that podcast is a ton of fun. Like I said, we talk about all things sex, and we do take questions and requests from listeners. And so sometimes we'll have episodes that we didn't even come up with a topic. It's more about something someone wanted us to talk about, and so we do that. So if anyone listening wants to follow that and check it out, we're on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube.
And what was the name of it again? Sex positivity.
Yeah, Sex Positivity Unfiltered.
I'm just putting this up here. Sex positivity unfiltered. Let's see. Got that right?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, perfect. So how can you be reached if anyone that's listening right now wanted to reach out to you for your services?
If you go to my website, it's relationshipmatterstx.com. That website will have all my services, email, a Twitter form, phone number, really any way you can think you can reach me there.
Relationshipsmattertx.com.
It's relationship singular and then matters plural. So relationship matters tx.com.
All right, let me put that up here on the
Yeah, that's it.
okay. Perfect. And someone did ask a question about your podcast. They said, is the podcast available through YouTube or Google Podcast?
Yes, I know it's for sure on YouTube. The Google podcast one, I'll have to get back with you because Google like changed some of their podcast terms, and I haven't checked on Google in a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, if no one has any other questions, Lindsay, I really, really, really do appreciate it. If you feel like you would like to mention or talk about something else, I'd love to have you back up. But
Yeah.
if you guys don't have any other questions and you don't have anything, Lindsay, enjoy the rest of your night, enjoy your weekend, and I will send you the link to this video whenever it finishes uploading.
All right. Awesome.
All
Thank
right,
you.
ma'am. Thank you. You have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Yeah, have a good night. Bye bye.